Hello everyone, and welcome to Unscrupulous, where we take a closer look at media, ethics, and the forces shaping how we understand the world around us. I'm your host, Jess Stewart, a student in the Broadcast and Electronic Communication Arts program at SF State. Today we're exploring a topic that sits at the heart of modern journalism. How does the business of news influence the ethics of news? From corporate ownership and shrinking local newsrooms to algorithmic pressure and the race to be first, financial forces shape what gets reported, how it gets reported, and who gets to tell the story. We're joined today by an incredible panel of journalists and media experts. First, we have Subbu Vincent, a director of journalism and media ethics at the Markkula Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University. Subbu works at the intersection of journalism ethics and news distribution technology, including how algorithms and people interact. Next is Michael Stoll, the senior editor and co-founder of the San Francisco Public Press. His newsroom is a nonprofit model focused on accountability reporting, local investigations, and news coverage free from the pressures of advertising dollars. We're also joined by our very own Paula Subbu, editor-in-chief of the Golden Gate Express, where she leads student journalists covering SF State and the wider San Francisco community. Her work centers on elevating student voices and community-based storytelling. Next, we have Ted Goldberg, the managing editor of news at KQED. Ted has covered some of the Bay Area's biggest political, environmental, and breaking news stories, bringing a sharp, investigative lens to local issues. And finally, Bob Butler, a multimedia reporter for KCBS Radio and longtime advocate for diversity in journalism through the National Association of Black Journalists. Bob has decades of field reporting experience across the Bay Area. Thank you all for joining us. I'd like to give each of you a moment of frame in this conversation from your area of expertise. So, my question is for Subbu. From your position working in media ethics and trust frameworks, what's one pressure on journalism today that you think people underestimate?
I think it starts with the word people. Just on the street, everyday people still don't have an opportunity to understand what it takes to do a great ethical story, just story that's taken work to source people in, to get interviews, to look at documents. The kind of work it takes to tell a great story is actual serious work. And I don't think there's an estimation of that effort automatically. We just implicitly assume people can tell a good story from another and all the work that led to it. It's not the case. The way people talk about the news in a cavalier way, they also talk about journalism. And that's the problem. So that has implications for the pressure that is in news organizations and how much work journalists have to then display their actual methods. Every story has to speak for itself. So there's a lot of tension there that hasn't really been systematically addressed, even though there are many projects that are trying to make an intervention in that space.
Thank you for sharing. So my next question is for Michael. So from your work in nonprofit and community journalism, what's one structural challenge you wish more people understood about how newsrooms survive?
The news doesn't pay for itself, and there's been a lot of changes in the industry as advertising gets disintermediated from journalism, and it goes to the web, and so a lot of news organizations have really struggled to pay for their core operations. I work in primarily investigative journalism, which also includes explanatory and solutions, but it's in depth and it takes a lot of time and a lot of resources and person power, and it doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes you do public records requests, you go deep, you talk to sources who maybe aren't easy to locate, who aren't media savvy, who don't, work by press release. And it takes time to then come back to the newsroom and analyze and synthesize and really kind of question each other. It's very collaborative. It's very labor intensive. And, ultimately the value to the market is close to zero. It's really hard to monetize. Often investigative reporting doesn't get clicks, but it's super important for sustaining the civic fabric of communities. And there's a tension there. A lot of newsrooms see their content battling with entertainment on social media, and it's very tempting to just kind of do the most available sensational story to boost your ratings. But what are you doing in the long term, and how does that affect, as Subbu said, trust?
Yeah. Thank you. So I'm going to ask a question for Paula now. So as a student journalist working in today's media environment, what's one thing you're already being told you'll have to compromise on?
I think just building off of what Michael said, it's really the pay and the work that we do. Sometimes it doesn't equate the pay that we get, and we put a lot of hours in. It's a lot of critical thinking, and I'm already seeing that in opportunities being offered to me with unpaid internships. Our school, our journalism department at SF State does a great job of encouraging us to find those paid internships, and they only have in the job listings board paid internships. And I think that's something that students need to hold to their standards, is that your work is worth something, and we shouldn't be doing this work unpaid because it's important work, and this is not something that is just a given, and it's not something that we should just accept because we want to have our foot in the door. We're building our careers, and we should be getting paid for that.
Yeah. So my next question is for Bob. So from your experience as a reporter, what's one change in newsroom culture or workflow over the years that most affects how stories get told today?
I think the biggest thing is corporate. I remember a time when the news was not a profit center, where it was something that you did as a public service, and people cared about that. I remember back, I think in 1990, we were bought. CBS Radio was bought by another company, and overnight they wanted a 40% profit margin as opposed to a 25% profit margin. And when they do that, that means you have to lay people off, and it cuts down the amount of news that you can actually cover. It's gotten even worse, and now I think what's the biggest problem is who really owns you. You know, CBS used to be, it's like the company that you always knew. Journalism came first. You know, that was the journalism side, then you had the entertainment side. Now it's all mixed into one. And journalism, the 3-word answer I came up with to the one thing is profit overshadows journalism. If you can't make a profit at it, they don't want you to do it. And that's how you get the sensational news. That's how you get the clicks. That's how you get somebody who's blaming, President Biden for letting in somebody from this country, even though President Trump is the one that gave them asylum. That doesn't get covered. That CBS just the other day had somebody blame Biden for this guy coming in. Yes, he came in under Biden, but he got asylum through Trump. They didn't report that part, and that's the problem.
Okay, so our next question is for Ted. So from your work in nonprofit and community journalism, what's one structural challenge you wish more people understood about how newsrooms survive?
That's a really good question and not easy to answer. I for a long time was the manager for our intern program, for our newscast program. And I always felt like if somebody showed persistence in the way that they applied for the job, that meant I knew that person was going to be a good journalist, because persistence pays off. I saw Bob do this for years when we worked together at KCBS. Persistence, I think, in the news business overall as an institution is probably like the biggest trait I would think would battle all the forces that you just described in all of your questions. Like, we cannot be hindered by some of the problems. They are no good. They're no fun. But that means that you cannot give up and you cannot slow down, and you have to be just as passionate and, truth-oriented as you were before. So I would say not just in nonprofit journalism or community investigative journalism, even in corporate journalism, to Bob's point, news organizations cannot duck down. They cannot be fearful. They have to be persistent. And that's the main thing I would think for our entire industry, is just to just keep at it and not give up and not slow down on our mission.
Okay, yeah, thank you everyone for sharing. So now that we have an understanding of where you are coming from, I want to start with something simple. It may be a little impossible. I'm going to ask each of you the same question, and I'd like you to answer it with up to 3 words. Give me one word that captures the relationship between capitalism and news journalism. Let's start with Ted.
Not an easy question. 3 words that describe capitalism and journalism. Fight for eyeballs.
Interesting. Okay, now Bob.
Profit trumps journalism.
Okay, and Paula.
Tug of war.
And then Michael
Super duper fraught.
and Subbu.
I was going to say what Ted was going to say on attention, but I'll change it to means and ends. It used to be the time that capital was a means to an end, but capitalism changes the means and ends relationship.
Okay, thank you. So, all right, we've set the table. You've given us keywords, the core tensions, and the lenses you're bringing. Let's get comfortable. Imagine we're sitting around a fire or at a late night editorial meeting after a long day, just people trying to understand the world together. So, let me open the conversation with, what do you think is the most coercive force shaping journalism today, and why?
The most coercive force is the owners of the media companies who are trying to get bigger, and they have to get approval from Washington, and they are actually bowed down to what Washington wants. And that doesn't make for good journalism, because there are some stories that we should be covering that we're not covering. I think it's very important that we need to be independent, that we have to be fearless in covering journalism. And the atmosphere now is that if you do that, you may pay the consequences. And the bosses don't want to take that chance. So they're very timid about what we cover nowadays.
And my next question is, have you ever felt that a story needed to be sensationalized just to get it past the algorithms?
No, never. And I would never, ever I would never change the way we do a story to make it juicier in that way. Do I want to focus in the lead or the headline on the most important and impactful thing that affects people? Absolutely, yes. Do I want to make it sexier in the headline? No. Do I want to make it more gratuitous or more bloody? No. So I think, I can understand the forces that you're talking about, the same forces that Bob talked about, the same problems, that I mentioned before in the competition for eyeballs. But you have to stand by your standards. You can't make anything up. You can't make it sound like it's different than it is. And your focus always has to be on what the story is, not a way to make it more appealing, exciting, or sexy to a reader or user.
Do you weigh accuracy versus speed when social media rewards being first?
So let me start with the accuracy versus speed thing. I think if we get confused about form and substance, that's where this kind of challenge happens. Because social media is putting pressure on us, then we have this question on speed versus not. But if we are working on the story for the story's own sake, what is the story we're actually trying to tell? And we separate that process from the production process of whoever's going to create the social media version of the story, then these are responsibilities you can actually divide up in a news organization. The issue comes up when the same person who's doing the story also has to somehow figure out how to tell it on social media, how to tell it on video, and this and that. And that's where these issues actually emerge. So there are ways to put safeguards in the actual newsroom approach to actually fix these things. I just feel that smaller newsrooms are under more pressure because there's less manpower. So that issue is actually there. I just wanted to have a quick take on your coercive force thing earlier, Tess. Because of where we are in America now, today, it looks like truth-telling itself is already under attack. And journalists are one type of actual truth tellers. There's also historians, there's also scientists. All of these folks in democracy, their job is to excavate the truth and tell. Historians are telling truth about the past, and reporters are saying truths about what's happening now. There is now substantial pressure, authoritarian attacks on just telling the truth, just going out there and reporting what's actually happening. So that's coming straight out of the White House, if I may say so. But that's resulting in that kind of behavior beginning to get copied by other politicians. So the real coercive force is also the corrosive force, that when one set of leaders starts doing that, a whole bunch of other leaders think that they can go after journalists as well. I feel that's where we are, but we're standing up. Bob just said, we have to stand up, and there's literally no other go, because you will not have a society left if you don't stand up.
And then my next question is for anyone on the panel. Do you think there is a barrier to public trust in journalism today? And if so, how impactful?
I can answer that one. I think the use of AI has been probably the biggest barrier so far. I think when people see the disclaimer, AI was used in this article or AI was used in transcription, that's an automatic sign that the reader is just going to be like, oh, they used AI, and they're going to question how much of AI did you use. So I think even in our policies to be transparent, that still creates a barrier. So I think as news organizations, we should be creating policies to be as transparent as possible. But I recently learned from a study that AI or transparency stays the same, or I guess public trust with the media stays the same even if we're transparent versus not being transparent. So that's something that I'm still grappling with and seeing ways that I could be transparent with my publication. But I think public trust is hard. Even when they see these buzzwords that make people want to distrust the media, they're going to automatically take that and think that we might be using it unethically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so my next question for anyone who would
Before you go on
like
to your next question, I think it's very important that we point out one of the biggest barriers to trust in the media is social media, because there are so many people on social media who say they are journalists, but they're not. They have no compunction against lying. They have no compunction against misleading you. They have no compunction against misinformation and disinformation. In fact, how many times have you read a headline of a story, then you read the story to find it had nothing to do with the headline? It happens all the time. True journalists don't do that.
Okay, so my next question is, what is the technology we need to help us verify what is real and what is not?
I've been thinking a lot about this recently, talking with journalists in my newsroom. There's a real tension right now, especially with the rapid acceleration of the sophistication of AI, about whether it's more of a threat or more of an opportunity. And I think it's a little bit of both. And it takes a nuanced view to say, okay, what is the power that these new technologies can bring to us in terms of the ability to research, to fact check, to copy edit, to do data analysis, to find information that's hidden in public databases. And I think if we as professionals kind of, close our eyes to what is revolutionizing every other industry in the country, we're going to be left behind, and we're going to be left with a lot less power than the corporations that are trying to spin or manipulate, or the government agencies that are using AI to create fake narratives that then we're at a disadvantage to disentangle. So I think we need to be open, and we need to recenter ourselves on the journalism ethics that we were trained on, and find ways to apply those to the new technologies that are coming down the pike.
Do you feel, and maybe for anybody here, that what I'm hearing you say, and I'm wondering if this is true, that the journalism industry, that journalists are slower to grapple with the issues about artificial intelligence, how much they should use it in their reporting, and how much readers actually trust it, that we are slower than other folks?
From my experience, yes, both inside and outside my organization, and even in a lot of professional associations, you see in like journalism conferences, you see AI as portrayed almost as an antagonist to the work that we're doing, and it kind of reminds me of an earlier era. Like every 15, 20 years, there's a new revolution, whether it's the web or search or social media and now AI. It comes in waves, and each time we get all anxious about, okay, is this going to compromise our ethics? Are we going to be, are we going to be led down a path where we're manipulated or we have blinders on. But people are having the same conversation about search engines. If I search for this news on Google instead of finding it myself, am I going to miss out on the real story because it's buried on the fifth, page of the page rank? And since then, we've learned to master those tools. We can master these as well and become leaders and use these tools and develop our own tools to tell the stories better and more efficiently and more compellingly.
Can I do a quick answer to Ted? So I feel the way we frame the question actually is important. I think journalists' responsibility is to decide what is real or not. It's not the technology's responsibility. So if we use tech to augment our determination work, then by all means, that's the way we should go. And historically, there's always been an approach where reporters do the best they can with the actual tools they have and keep expanding that. The issue that this generation of tech has happened, Tess, especially in the last 50 years, 20 years, and 10 years, is the internet has changed distribution. So distribution as a technology puts pressure on journalists to take responsibility for making sure their stories show up on search, their stories show up on social, their stories show up here and there. And that requires changes to the actual story. That's different from using tech to produce your own stories, to actually analyze documents and actually investigate them. So there's confusion in the area where there's a lot of professional class of folks who want to train themselves, and there's pressure to actually do it. But ultimately, it's a fairly straightforward thing. Journalism and the ethics of it ought to help us tell what's real and what's not. And there are people trying their best to manipulate us, trying their best to manipulate data and facts and documents and deception and all of that. So it's usually possible to find a way as long as we give tech the space it actually ought to be in. And I say that as a former engineer who uses tech a lot.
Yeah, I think journalists are kind of behind in accepting AI, and I think that's just because we're inherently scared of the fact that they might take our jobs, and there's generative AI. A lot of people know it by writing things. So I think we're in a field that is in danger of that, but it can also help us do our jobs. So many other industries are using it, and that's why we have editors. That's why we have human reporters, and I think that we should trust ourselves a little bit more and allow our reporters to be transparent in the way that they've been using AI, and then we can tell them if that's unethical, and I think that's something that we need to dip our feet in more. Is just we're never going to learn how to use it unless we try to use it, and then we can patchwork from there.
So how do we keep journalists ethical when it appears to the general audience that ethics is in decline?
I don't think the general audience believes ethics is in decline. I think about a third of the country of the audience believes ethics are in decline. I think most of the people in this country understand ethics. They understand what's right and wrong, but there are a lot of people that don't want to believe it. So I think we remain ethical by being ethical. We don't put stories on that we know are wrong. There are some media organizations that will do that, but as journalists, we can't do that. We have to always do stories that we know are true. And I think once we continue to do that, eventually people will understand. Most of the people believe us when we say that the sky is blue. There are other people that say, well, the sky is not blue, it's pink. Well, go out and look out. Don't just report both sides. Go out and look outside to what color the sky is. That's the most important part. I think if we continue doing what we know how to do, I think we'll be all right.
Any other comments?
So one of the issues I have with any of the media conversations we're actually having is there's an assumption, and I could be wrong here, there's an assumption that there's one public and there's one newsroom and there's one journalism, and there's never that kind of reality in any country where news organizations exist. Every news organization has its own audience. This sometimes tends to be one type of group. Sometimes it's multicultural, but there are many publics that come to a newsroom, and so it ends up becoming the job of the actual newsroom to educate their audiences about what is ethics, like what is our ethics, what is our ethics approach, culture, sourcing, storytelling. When do we allow, for example, people to not be named? When do we insist that they be named? There are many things that newsrooms can be open about, and they are. I think that process earlier was very elitist. People just assume newsrooms have to just tell the story, and everybody should just, believe us just because we say so. That's changed. But I think the process by which that change has been systematized is actually still not clear. Every newsroom is fighting its own battle to educate people about its ethics. And some people are like very, very hand wavy even now. Some folks are very detailed. And you got to connect ethics to mission. If you link that up and people actually see that, your public, the group you go out to, whether it's 1 million or actually 5K people, tend to get a sense that we can trust you because we know how you operate for your actual stories. That's the part I feel we're actually going through now.
Are there newsrooms, news organizations that are doing a good job of that you could name, that you feel like, okay, they're shining examples of showing their sort of transparency, how they do things?
So I feel that mission-oriented organizations are actually better off at explaining themselves than the traditional sort of big J organizations. So if I go to the 19th News, which is gender, if I go to, let's say, MLK 50, I see that they're open about social justice being a goal, but they're not compromising on sourcing. They don't compromise on factualness. They don't put lies out there, like Bob says. So you can do all the journalism you want factually, but you can choose what stories are you going to tell. Whose stories are you actually going to tell? Those are all things you can actually be open about. So if I go to any of these organizations, if I go to my friend Michael Stoll's organization, I can tell from their About Us page that they've not incorporated themselves to be traditional news in that sense. But I think what's happening is I don't think the public gets a sense that the About Us page is the page you go to discover your storytelling ethics. There has to be some other way, like in the story itself, in every story, to discover what is my newsroom's actual culture. It's like, I feel journalism is like milk because it's a cultural occupation. It's not a technical occupation. So one needs to actually, when you buy stuff in the actual supermarket, you tend to know what milk you trust. It's not all the milk everybody buys actually something. So there is a built-in sort of relationship you have over time, and that needs to be opened out across news organizations. Right now, the short answer to your thing, I'm sorry to get long-winded, is every newsroom is trying to do the ethics storytelling, the mission connection on their own, but it's not telling everybody else that there's a standard way to discover it. That's the problem. And so when people speak to each other, they're not actually telling each other, I know this news organization has this role, and so I go to them for these actual, videos or pieces and so on. It's just not automatically clear. And I'll give more examples later, but I'll stop.
Did Michael want to say something? Or?
Trust is very hard to get and very easy to break. And you earn your trust with every story, and it's incremental, and sometimes extraneous forces can destroy it. And there has been, I think the biggest trend in media in the last 20 years has been changes in ownership and changes in the attitude of owners to the newsrooms, as Bob alluded to. So you have situations where, for example, at the Washington Post and the LA Times, you have publishers who have all the money in the world, who are completely disconnected from the culture of journalism and the ethics, who dictate what goes in and boss the journalists around, and then you have audiences who immediately understand the implications of this and drop their subscriptions in protest. On the other hand, you also have, and my organization has been a small part of this, journalists themselves in communities around the country who are watching these trends, watching the consolidation and liquidation of many newsrooms that have been around for decades, and saying we have to do something. There is a hole in the community news infrastructure in our town, city, state, and they build new newsrooms, and they use the technology that's available to leapfrog into audiences that resonate with them. And there's an organization called the Institute for Nonprofit News that started out about 15 years ago with 60 organizations around the country. We were one of them. And it is now, I think, over 450 organizations around the country that had the same idea kind of at the same time, which is journalists have a social responsibility. They have skills they need to give back, and they need to also be in conversation with communities. The nonprofit business model is a great way to do it. It's not the only way to do it, but I think that one solution is diversity of ownership, diversity of beats, perspectives, methodologies, geographies. That kind of diversity will help make journalism more robust, resilient, and give audiences more choices and be able to scrutinize better what's good and what's bad.
Okay, so my next question I'm going to ask is, when should newsrooms openly retract or correct reporting, and how should a correction be ethically presented?
Every time you make a mistake.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, it sounds like we're talking about two different things. It's a correction. You can do that quickly. Or, once you find out that you've made a mistake, or you can put that in your story, and on the radio station, you can come out and say, we made a mistake. Retraction of like an entire story, that's a much bigger thing. That's an extreme thing that is extremely rare. I don't know. I mean, you have to get to the point where there is an extreme amount of wrongness in that story, and a lot of people messed up, and there was no safeguards, and a lot of people had to clean up that mess. That's different than a correction. People on a regular basis, when you find out you've made a mistake, you should be upfront about it and quick about it. That's a regular part of business. We're in the truth-telling business, and if we make a mistake, we don't hide it. Retracting a story, disappearing a story is the 10th degree. I don't know how to say it. Extreme, and it is extremely rare, and it only like the nuclear option. And I think that's something that you're not going to find very, very often.
But you can't retract a story once it's already been aired. Okay, you can correct it, but you can't retract it.
So there's one problem with where to present the correction. So let's say you're making the correction. The primary approach newsrooms have taken, online newsrooms across the world, I say this, UK, US, India, Germany, and so on, is they put it at the bottom of the story. When you put something at the bottom of the story, chances are people who read the headline and the first few graphs and then they don't get to the bottom are not going to know that a correction was made. That actually harms the newsroom, because the ethics of the newsroom isn't being upheld, isn't being shown, isn't being elevated. So if you put the correction at the top, right after the byline comes, right after the author's name, or right after the subtitle comes, then you tell people you have a process, and the rest of what you read has gone through a check, and there was a mistake, and so we fixed it, whatever be the actual mistake. That's a design problem, because people don't want to put a correction at the top, so they haven't. So we've got to have this is a UX experience thing, not so much a journalism thing. You've got to find a way to put it up so it doesn't interfere with the flow, but it's visible that it was done, and it's on top, as opposed to like a sideline. The other problem with corrections is distribution. Even if a news organization makes a correction, it's making a correction on the surface it owns, which is a web page, for example, or an Instagram post, for example. But once distribution's already happened, trying to re-permeate the corrections or redistribute the corrections to all the million people who actually saw the first version is close to impossible, because the algorithms are not going to want to remember all the people because then you're getting into surveillance and all of those issues. So one project at ASU actually tried to work with Facebook to try to build a corrections redistribution mechanism, saying, okay, we made a fix to the story. Now we want to give notifications by push to all the people who saw the first story. these social media companies don't have that real big incentive to work with newsrooms only for that one thing, because that means their general purpose infrastructure has to accommodate this sort of thing. So I don't know where that actually went. It didn't really, the actual project has ended, but that shows to you how hard it is to let people know that an actual correction was made. So
Can I follow up on that real quick? So I wonder, and I would like to hear if you're okay with this, what other people feel about this. The first part of your point, that the corrections are always at the bottom. And I've always felt like, yes, journalists, we are transparent. We make a mistake. We've got to tell everybody about it. But I think there's also a worry, and it goes to something I think that you pointed out as well, about the worries that we have about public trust. If we're telling everybody that we're making mistakes all the time, they're not going to trust us. And I wonder sometimes if the reason why the mistake is not publicized in all the ways that you just explained is because somewhere in the back of our minds or in our hearts, we're afraid that if we put on a megaphone how we made a mistake at the beginning of a story and really loud, that people are not gonna trust us. That's something that I've wondered. I maybe not said it out loud. I'm saying it now for the first time. But do you feel like there's a sense that we don't want to share with everybody that we messed up all the time because of that?
Yeah, I think as journalists, we want to be the people that know everything and is right all the time. But at the end of the day, we're working on tons of stories, and sometimes there is a mistake that comes up. And how to be transparent about it is hard, because you're admitting that you couldn't do your job, that maybe we worked too fast, maybe we weren't careful. But I think what pushes me to be transparent is that there is somebody out there that knows that that information is wrong. And the mere fact of not acknowledging that is even more untrustworthy. And I think that's the one thing, is that someone out there is going to know that we made a mistake, and that's our responsibility as journalists to correct that mistake. As for retractions, I think there should be a bigger process rather than just a correction. I think that's something that requires a lot of meetings with editors, and retractions is like taking back a fact and erasing history in a sense. Is like, well, something that we said as fact is not true. And I think that's something that should be recirculated on all platforms, even as a separate story.
Any other comments? Oh, Subbu?
No, I think Ted's ask is important. I'm glad he's asking it the way he's asking, because it goes to the core of how fragile the relationship is between us and the people who come to the newsrooms, to the actual sites. So we worry about this thing. So it's actually legitimate to worry. I feel that shouldn't stop at worrying. That there has to be a way to build consensus in a news organization about how to share the worry, that it's a shared burden across the news organization, even with the actual people who read the stories, because sometimes they're the ones who point the actual mistakes out, and they need to be given actual credit by name or not, and so on and so forth. So I still frame it as a design issue, Ted. There's got to be a way to be open about it and still not worry that if it is the case that we're making lots of factual things, and we have to keep updating sites, then there's a problem in our newsroom already. If you're making one every few months across the stream of output you put, it should not be impossible to put that up front and maybe have a conversation about it every month or every week, where you explain to people why you made these corrections, and then you say what's changing in the newsroom process. So if there's an ongoing dialogue, it makes it easier. If it's only a single update and then you just have to worry about what people are going to think, that's a one-way process again. And that's why we have this issue. So I think it's a process, and we haven't figured out how to talk to people about the process. Maybe talk to people on social media instead of talking to people on the sites itself. I think Bob has some, yeah.
Wait a minute.
There's a tension between building your brand and establishing a historical record, and I think design can be one solution, but having gone we're now in our 16th year of publication, we've seen that some stories age well and some stories are completely obsolete, but they're still up on our website. And we have databases that are not relevant anymore, but people come and look up the information on our site. And so, that's an example of where it wasn't wrong at the time, but it doesn't make sense now to be up there as a resource. So do we have an ethical obligation to go back to each of those stories that are still getting a lot of hits and say, this story needs to be updated. We need to spend time going back and contextualizing and framing stories so that people don't come away with a misimpression that this is the current state of our community. So that's kind of not, it's not an error of commission, it's an error of omission, perhaps. And do newsrooms have an obligation to do that kind of work, kind of more like librarians than people on the street, covering what's right in front of them.
Yeah, we tell our audience that you can trust us. We're not going to lie to you. So if we make a mistake, we're obligated to go back and correct that mistake. I'll give you an example. Go way back to 1989, the Loma Prieta earthquake. We had a person from Alameda County go on the air and tell us that they believe that more than 100 people died in the superstructure when it collapsed. Okay? We'll come to find out that was an estimate based on the normal traffic patterns of the number of cars that would be there on a normal Tuesday afternoon. Well, it wasn't a normal day because of the World Series. People were already at home. So it was only like, I think, 10 people that died there. We reported what she said, but once we found out that was wrong, we had to go back and say, no, this is how many people died. That's very important for us to do. We can talk all day about, whether it's our obligation or not. It is our obligation to not lie to our people. Not all organizations are like that. They'll lie to you to your face, and they won't think twice about it. Those are not ethical organizations.
Yeah. Anyone else? Anything else? Okay. So how do ethical expectations differ between corporate newsrooms, public media, and nonprofit models?
I'll give you that, because you worked in both.
I did. I worked at KCBS with Bob for 10 years, and now I'm at KQED, which is public radio. So you want to know how ethics are different. Well, I'm not in a corporate environment now, and I don't know if that would be different now based on the administration. Your question earlier, what were the two big forces? And I was thinking all of our answers, one of the main coercive forces against journalism is the Trump administration right now. And so I would imagine, to Bob's point that he made earlier, that kind of pressure can affect corporate media now more than ever, probably. When I was at KCBS, I'd like to think, careful choice of words, that we were not pressured by the corporation to change the way we did the news, or that we compromised our ethics. Might it have been in the air and maybe I didn't know subconsciously? That's very possible. I want to leave that open. I'd like to think that in the 10 years I worked there, I didn't let anything like that seep in.
It was one time.
Well, let me finish, and if that'll be up to you if you want to continue divulging that. I would say now, though, where I am now, hearing some of the answers about what it's like to work in corporate media, I feel privileged. There are stories that some of folks that report to me and that we do. Once the Trump administration came into power and started pressuring news organizations about the way they report on immigration enforcement, said, should we continue to report on this aggressively? And I can say that comfortably, yes, absolutely. We should not change the course of business. We should keep being aggressive as possible. So while I kind of know the difference, I don't really know what it's like now to be in a corporate atmosphere. I can only hear what people say, and I can believe that I don't have to feel that pressure. Not to say that we don't in public media feel pressure from the Trump administration. I mean, public media lost millions upon millions of, my news organization lost millions of dollars because they clawed back federal funding from public media. Public media has been under investigation. So yes, there is pressure, but I don't change the way I do business. I don't feel like we are different somehow ethically, and I didn't feel that when I worked with you for so many years. But it sounds like you wanted me to talk about this.
Yeah, remember back in 2004, the media wanted more consolidation. Remember that back at that time? Well, the FCC held a hearing here in San Francisco on this consolidation issue, and I wanted to cover it, and I was told I couldn't cover it because it was too complicated. I was I was sent to cover something else. I was very, very unhappy about that because I thought it was very important that our listeners should know what this consolidation is all about. Our company did not want us to cover it because it wanted more consolidation. Conflict of interest, but it happened.
I think this is an important thing just to talk about I mean, just the just the differences between the for-profit and the non-profit model on ethical expectations. I think at the factual level, like the basic story level, at the building block level, it's the same. Don't get your facts wrong. Don't report non-factual claims as if they were factual claims. Don't platform disinformation. Don't do both sidesism for the sake of doing diversity of viewpoint and all of that. So those things are similar. Where the ethical expectation will change is newsworthiness. Who determines what's news? The commercial newsrooms are going to go with sensational news and so on, framing of controversies, pick up a controversy because it's going to spread. It's easier to get eyeballs, like you said. Whereas the non-profit newsrooms are not going to necessarily make news determinations based on just eyeballs, because their approach to funding model itself defines news in a what I would call either aligned with actual mission, values, and so on, and the needs of actual people on the ground. So that's where the ethics actually will change. So what narratives are we holding ourselves responsible for, through which we will place this news or that will change. So I feel the ethical compromises are made in the for-profit, news organizations around just the question of what's news itself. But once you get into the story, the accountability for the individual pieces of facts in it is pretty much the same, because the professionalism of the actual reporter is called into question there anyway.
I'd also like to add, I used to intern at Sinclair, and yeah, so we would make our local stories, and then when the producer's making the rundown, they're like, okay, now we got to run the story from corporate. And a lot of us in the newsroom are like, well, we don't like this story, but it's something that we have to do. And it was always a push and pull of, okay, do we want this local story to be the first story? But in order to, appease corporate, we had to run what they told us to run. And I think in nonprofit newsrooms, we don't have that pressure of like, should we do something that we've been told to do and that aligns with our company mission. So I think definitely working at Sinclair was quite an experience, because we're pushing out news that sometimes we're not proud of, but it's going to make the first headline.
Sinclair called those must-runs, and they're very, very prominent during election campaigns.
In nonprofit media, and I think there are also many, many startup, small neighborhood, even some mom and pop newsrooms in communities that were news deserts that were abandoned by primarily newspaper companies that retreated or folded for financial reasons, or because of consolidation. You're more likely to have the ultimate authority vested in people with journalism credentials and experience and ethos than with somebody outside of the newsroom. And so I think that can be a solution. It's not, for-profit versus nonprofit, although I've worked in nonprofit journalism for most of my career, and I continue to promote it.
Okay. Any other comments? No? Okay. So I have kind of like a broad question for you guys here. Do you see ethics in journalism manipulated to allow for unethical things?
I've never seen that in my newsroom.
So the most common problem there is the attack on bias. When people accuse journalists of bias, they are trying to weaponize the fairness framework journalists have on accounting for sources, including all of the viewpoints and so on. They're trying to attack that and weaponize that, saying, you're biased against me, that's why your stories are like this, and that'll force the reporters to go out and include more views from those folks. But those folks might just be spitting lies for all you know. So the idea of weaponizing ethics is not new. I think it's Richard Nixon's vice president, Spiro Agnew, who said the press is the enemy of the people. It's not Donald Trump. It came from 1969. I had to go back and read, where is this attack on the press actually coming from? Everything in America has a historical basis. So attacking the press is a way to say, you have some ethics, we'll try to make you use that to actually include more of the things that we want to be included. And it's not that it's wrong to actually attack the press. It's not wrong, because you have to hold people accountable for what they're saying. It's just that when you do it, you can also do it to actually manipulate the ethics itself.
Yeah, and I think we're out of time, so that brings us to the end of today's discussion on the intersection of capitalism and news. A huge thank you to our guests for their insight, honesty, and expertise, and for helping us understand now just how journalism works, but why ethical journalism matters now more than ever. Unscrupulous is about asking better questions, challenging easy assumptions, and examining the forces that shape our media landscape. If you'd like to see more conversations like this, you can find this episode and future episodes on BECA Media YouTube channel, as well as in audio form wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for joining us, and until next time, question the unscrupulous.